Burton-on-Trent, a great brewing town in the heart of the Midlands. You can see Burton's famous landmark, the Bass Tower, down there. But long before the brewers got here, Burton had a very different reputation. Back in the Middle Ages, there was a famous abbey here. Indeed, it was the most important abbey in the whole of central England. Walking around the town now, there wouldn't seem to be much left of it, but perhaps there's more here than meets the eye. Altogether, there are 3 buildings here that local people are keen to prove were part of the abbey or connected with it. This is the manor house. Doesn't look very promising, does it? This is called the Abbey Inn, although whether it's actually got anything to do with the abbey or not is a different matter. And 1.5 miles up the road, overlooking Burton, is the very dilapidated Sinai Park House. Our teams have got just 2 days to plunder the archives and sort out Burton Abbey, which was, I hear, party to some pretty unsavoury medieval practices. How important was Burton Abbey in the Middle Ages?
Oh, I think it would have dominated everybody's life for miles around here for over 500 years, because it owned immense areas of land, lots of villages. All the peasants and so on would have been dependent on the abbey.
And what about the town around it?
Well, the abbey may well have founded that as another source of income, because you could lease out the properties in the town and you could get money from the markets and so on for people coming to trade there.
Yeah.
And we can see that to some extent in this 19th century plaque over the market hall, because it commemorates the abbot reconfirming the charter with King John, making sure they could continue to hold this market to make money from the people coming to it.
And now the whole abbey's gone?
Yeah, it's just a few buildings left.
So how are our teams going to work out where the traces of it are?
Well, they can look at the surviving buildings, very, very few of them. But they're also big administrative, bureaucratic institutions, these monasteries, so there's lots of documents for them to look at. And probably the other major source is just to compare what we know with other monastic sites around the country.
Team 1, the Abbey Inn. Glyn Miles is the manager. So this is going to be a really big weekend for you, isn't it? By the end of it, we should know whether the Abbey Inn actually is as old as you think it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this isn't just a pub. What Glyn wants to know is whether his pub was once the Abbey's infirmary. He's roped in one of his bar staff, Janet Warren, to help, and also one of the pub's regulars, Phil Campbell. The Sinai Park House team is led by local Dr. Robin Trotter, a passionate historian. Is it history in general that you're interested in, or particularly medieval?
Particularly medieval, particularly church, particularly monastic, really, I think.
Robin's teamed up with local joiners Andy Till and Bob Shale, who've both worked on the house. It's 1.5 miles above Burton, so was it a building used by the monks? Close to the Abbey Inn is the manor house, now divided up into offices. Team 3 work in the building. Downstairs, the Riviera Travel Agency, with Michael Wright and Lisa Donald. And up here, there's a completely different kind of operation going on. Maybe we can delay someone's pain for a few minutes.
Yeah, good.
Andy, Jane, how are you?
Hi.
You ready for the big off? Andy Campbell has had his surgery here for 14 years, but neither he nor his assistant, Jane Jenkins, knows if the building is old enough to have been part of the Abbey or if it was always called the Manor House.
That's obviously something we've got to find out, is how long that name's been in use, and also whether it had an earlier name that might be useful to us.
So what did a great medieval abbey look like? Part of our team's task will be to work out a plan for Burton Abbey, so while they prepared for day 1, Mick and I took a trip to Rievaulx in North Yorkshire. For 400 years, Rievaulx was the most important Cistercian abbey in Britain, and it gives us a very good idea of how abbey buildings were laid out.
This is the church, And this is where they would have met 7 times a day to do the services, the Opus Dei, the work of God.
And would Burton have looked like this?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably about this sort of size, but in detail it would have been different because it's a different order. This is Cistercian, that was Benedictine. But nevertheless, the basic job of meeting in the quiet of the services was the same here as it was in every other abbey. And we can learn a great deal from Revo, actually, about the daily life of monks at that time, because here the buildings survive. At Burton they don't, but it was still the same sort of life.
And what would have been in all these buildings?
Well, I mean, above this range here would have been the dormitory they slept in, and there was a staircase coming down so they could get to the church at night. Yeah. But if we look over here, you've basically got the 3 ranges, the East Range, South Range and West Range.
And what about this bit in the middle here?
The cloister area, we tend to see it today as a series of passages, like corridors. But this was actually the work area. They would have set up little desks, or what I call carrels, in these. And when they weren't in the church, a number of them would be working on documents and compiling records and so on. So it's the workspace. There's always lots of passages through like this. But this is actually perhaps the most important room in the monastery, because this is where all the day-to-day activities and all the administration was carried out. And this is the chapter house. And of course, at the end, this is the place where the decision on the dissolution would have taken place. You know, they would have had to decide whether to accept the king's terms to shut the place down.
So the very end of the story of this abbey takes place here?
Yeah, and the same in the other 800 abbeys across the country.
Day 1 starts.
We're on.
What we got then, Glenn? The Abbey Inn team decide their first step will be a tour around the outside of the building.
There's a plaque on the wall over here. Just there.
Mick?
Yeah?
Burton Civic Society. The Abbey Inn stands in the grounds of the Burton Abbey, 1004 to 1539.
And incorporates part of the Abbey Hospital.
Yeah, there you are. Game over. Didn't take 2 days, did it?
Hang on, because it doesn't look like that, does it? I mean, this doesn't look like an Abbey Hospital at all.
Definitely not.
Well, you think they might be mistaken?
Well, I'd like to know what evidence there is around that they based that.
There's a statue on the wall just around the corner here. Just there.
I mean, look at the date there, 1888, look. Over the doorway.
What do you think that statue would probably be?
Well, I don't know. I need to get up to it, but I would say that's probably 19th century as well, isn't it, Glenn?
Right.
I've been silly.
Oh, look, that's OK. Look at that. That's fine, isn't it? That's a capital off a Norman pillar. It's not in situ, but it's you know, that shows that the stuff around, and that's a bit of medieval stonework as well.
Is there anything significant around the back? Look at this, Mick. Now you can see why the place is here at all, can't you?
That's good, isn't it?
That's great.
I imagine that detail's got a lot of significance.
Oh, look at that lot.
What's that mean, Mick? You're the scholar.
So I don't know, but it's the 19th century again, I would guess. In fact, the whole thing looks like a bit of a mishmash, because the next bit of wall looks old, with this wooden thing down the front. What's that, Lynn? What's that wooden thing?
That's to let my cats get in and out of the flat. Not particularly medieval, I'm afraid. There's some more of that stonework just down here.
Ah, yeah. Glenn, that's very different to this Victorian stonework here, isn't it?
Similar to the stonework we've just looked at.
What's this then?
Oh, wow.
That looks like a springer for an arch coming up there, isn't it?
What's a springer?
Well, where you've got the vault starting, going up, and you've got the main stone that supports it.
And that's sort of the same time period as the rest of the building, I presume?
Well, I think so, because that looks more like the medieval than perhaps those alterations later on.
Right. Well, if that's an arch and that's a vault, then what was above it?
Well, it may not be a vault, but it could actually be the body of the hospital, because it is like a hospital ward. But clearly we're going to need to get above it, and we're going to need to get into the roof sometime in the weekend and examine the structure of the place. Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I have a sort of rule of thumb about buildings when I'm looking at them, and that is that people tend to alter the bit at the bottom, at the front, that's seen by visitors. So that's always up to date. The stuff further back and the stuff up in the roof tends to get left and ignored. Right. And that's where the clues to the structure are going to be, I think.
Like today, no one ever decorates behind the central heating boiler.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. OK.
Right, so, bring some drawings, plans and material. See you later. Over at our history room, the Manor House team are working out the site of the Abbey, with the help of old maps of Burton. How far have you got?
Well, this map, this incredible map, is 1760.
Hushed tones.
It's just phenomenal. But anyway, we've got it back to 1760 as far as the name is concerned, but the name change we found from various maps and various photographs that the whole of the Abbey Inn, the Manor House, and the whole of the ground in between was called the Manor. This is the Abbey Inn because you can see the map is such good detail. You can see where the Inglenook fireplaces are. And this is our bit that we occupy, but obviously a totally different shape.
So it's all part of the same setup?
Same entity as at 1760, and we can't get any further back than that at the moment.
We've got some great photos, though. This one actually shows the gatehouse, which was the main entrance to the whole of the manor grounds.
So we've got a rough idea of the monastic site, but the team still need to prove today's manor house was part of the medieval abbey.
We want to find out what the buildings were used for, which will give us more of a clue. And
So how are you going to do that?
Well, that's what we're going to do next. We're going to go over to the manor, have a look, see, the structure and everything, and see if that gives any more clues.
Right, I'll see you later on.
See you later on.
The Sinai Park team have got a real headache of a job. Their house is a long way away from the Abbey precinct. It's largely derelict and mostly too dangerous to go into. The team want to know from architectural historian Bob Meeson how much of what is visible today dates from the time of the monks.
The chances are that this is a 13th century site with a moat around it. But the moat now serves as the home to what appears to be a later building, which is apparently not something that was built all at one moment in time. Right. It developed over time. That sort of construction in Staffordshire you might expect to be after 1500. We're clearly in the 16th century, I think, when we're looking at those studs. That is one of two wings, parallel to each other, forming a kind of courtyard. And at the back of the courtyard, you can see what most people might think of as a medieval hall.
There's a screened passage through the
screened
middle
passage,
and a hall to one side.
A central path, the smoke curling up into the roof, yes. But we don't actually have that sort of building on the site now. So if there ever was a hall there, it's been swept away and replaced by the structure that's there now. That wall is earlier.
Down in the cellar, the team find evidence of medieval stonework, so clearly people were living at Sinai in the monastic era.
The character of the wall looks medieval, so we could be talking about a 14th century cellar, or possibly even something older.
Right, so these timbers...
It's the right period, but that doesn't mean the monks were here. Robin's wondering what else they can do to interpret the building.
Tree ring dating, perhaps, to help hone in on a date?
This building has had a limited amount of tree ring dating undertaken on it, but not enough to be able to understand the dating of every phase. It really is a very complicated structure with many phases of building and rebuilding.
But this is the original corner, isn't it?
The Manor House team have drawn a blank with the maps. None of them go back to the Middle Ages. So Mike's asked for Mick's help identifying what, if any, medieval remains there are within the Manor House itself.
And these are the old timbers I showed you on the other side.
Yeah.
Which are quite interesting.
So this is our ground level down here, in fact.
Quite.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is,
This is more wood.
is this a door?
Oh, blimey, yeah. Can I poke that out there?
Yeah, I hope so.
That's, there's the chamfer inside, look.
Good
How about that? You've either got an outside door or a door coming through from another building or apprentice or something there.
That's fantastic. I feel like I've really discovered something.
Well, you have,
made
yeah.
my day, that. Eureka.
Back at Sinai Park House, Robert Howard has arrived from the University of Nottingham. He's going to take some timber samples for tree ring dating.
Yeah, apparently...
Inside the house, the team have made a discovery in the restored north wing.
Apparently the monks are supposed to have done this many hundreds of years ago.
Wait a minute. Bob was saying that this might be 16th century. If we're talking monks, we're talking before the dissolution of the monasteries, 1536, 1540. And it may be later than the monastic period.
Yes.
We'll have to get some... Look, there are birds with rather fearsome beaks and feathers, and there's another one there with wings. I wonder if that's later than the monastic time.
We have to find somebody.
Find an expert who could help us with that. Why is it called Sinai?
Well, it's a funny name. It's an unusual name, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that might be worth having a look at.
Biblical name.
That's right.
Mount Sinai, Moses and the Ten Commandments.
No, it's on top of a hill, so I suppose it's a bit of a start.
Sounds a bit monastic, doesn't it?
Right.
What about this moat, the date? We go right back...
Well, 13th century, wasn't it? For
13th
what Bob
century?
said, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, what's happened in that time? What's it been used for?
Probably got an old, roughly 13th century site. With a later building, a very complicated building, terrific lot of alteration and change in use. If the monks did own it, what did they do here?
Could be a retirement home. You never know, do you?
Did monks retire?
I don't know.
Ezekiel cried, dry bones. Ezekiel cried, dry bones. Ezekiel cried, dry bones. Now hear the word of the Lord. Ezekiel connected them, dry bones. Ezekiel connected them, dry bones. Ezekiel connected them, dry bones. Now hear.
And what's through here?
Oh, well, this is the infirmary.
Here?
Yes, and notice that it's dominated by the church, just as medicine in the Middle Ages was dominated by religion.
When Mick and I were visiting Revo Abbey, we met up with medical historian Carol Rawcliffe. Since the Abbey Inn team were busy finding out if their pub was a hospital, I thought we ought to know more about how medieval medics actually diagnosed people.
Everybody is made up of 4 humours. So you've got black bile, which is cold and dry. You've got the phlegmatic humour, which is cold and wet. You've got the choleric humour, which is hot and dry and angry. And then you've got the sanguine humour, which is the best, which is sunny and which is warm and moist. And we use these words today still, don't we?
Sure.
You know?
You'd all have bits of both inside.
Yes, but you'd have a dominant humour, which would be affected by your sex, your age, your circumstances, your diet.
So what's he dominant in?
Well, you know,
I was wondering about you.
I think he's a good one. I think you're basically sanguine with a touch of the phlegmatic, but sanguine.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
definitely.
Yeah. The good guys.
The good guys, yes. Yes.
What's he, though?
Well, bad news here, I'm afraid. You're the platonic form of melancholic man, I'm afraid. It's black bile.
Thank you so much.
Right, if you look at all these plans I've been looking at, then you'll find that the infirmary is always to the south-east of the main abbey. You've got the main abbey there and the infirmary to the south-east.
Right.
You've got the main abbey and the infirmary is that one there.
Right.
And the same with this one. You've got the church.
Yeah.
And the infirmary's over to the south-east.
Right.
So really, looking at all these maps, the Abbey Inn is to the south-east of where the main abbey was. So it looks as though...
But is the similarity between abbey plans enough to prove the Abbey Inn was the infirmary? To find out more about what abbey buildings there were at Burton, Glyn and Janet decide to call on local historian Dennis Stewart. Apparently, the only accurate description of the buildings is in the surveys done by the Paget family after they acquired them from Henry VIII in the 1540s.
Hello there, Mr. Stewart.
Yes?
My name's Glyn.
Hello, Glenn. Now, this is one survey from 1545 and another survey from 1562. And it does show you, it's marvellous, it gives you the sizes of the various abbey buildings. Look, the great court in length, 432 feet. These are in Roman figures. And we have here the church in length, and it says here 300 feet.
Why isn't the infirmary listed with their buildings they acquired? And why is that piece still standing and not the rest?
Can't really answer that question really confidently, but in fact, the infirmary is mentioned as the infirmary cloister And if there's a cloister, I suppose, there must be some buildings around it, otherwise you can't have a cloister.
Having established that the Paget survey is the key to the Abbey buildings, Glyn and Janet climbed up into the roof of the Abbey Inn to see if there were any clues there.
I have never been up here.
Well, there's always the first time, and just look at that, isn't it wonderful? Come on, that's a very special roof indeed. Do you think we could go on along it to see how much more we can see?
I should think so.
Do I really have to go along here?
Mind your feet
really
and your
want
head.
to.
That's one very brave
virtually
lady. Well done.
done it.
Well done. But look at this. This is different. That arch over there, can you see? Well, you can see the brickwork inserted there, and around the brickwork, that great pointed arch. Not only can we get an idea that we're well into the medieval period, perhaps the decorated period, but we're also looking at a window which went much further down than the floor that we're standing on. It was a really large gable window. And yes, over there, look, you can see, if you turn around carefully, there's the remains of another window at the far end of this space, and so what we're dealing with here is a very large space which is very ecclesiastical in character, yes.
Why would there be a chapel sort of here when there's a church just down
well,
the road, you know?
I think bearing in mind the context of the site and the sort of building...
Apart from the Abbey church itself, the one Abbey building to have its own chapel was the infirmary. But Janet still wanted to know why there was no mention of an infirmary in the Paget survey.
Right, yes. It could be a number of reasons, but the very fact that there has been an infirmary chapel doesn't mean to say that it always served that function. There may have been a change of use which would have resulted in the building being called by a different name at some stage after the change of use has occurred.
Right.
Sinai Park, art historian Sharon Cather has come along to interpret those extraordinary birds painted on the walls.
They're typical for domestic interiors, so merchants, gentry, that sort of interior would have this kind of painting.
And would they have been done by artisans who spent all their time doing this, or are they more like doodles that a local family would have put on the wall themselves?
No, they're professional. They're certainly professional paintings and would have been done by professional painters.
Do they signify anything? Are they allegorical?
Unfortunately not. They're decorative paintings.
You'd never seen anything like that?
No, I haven't.
Did you?
No.
Would the whole room have been decorated in the same fashion?
Absolutely, and it would be important, actually, to look around for other traces.
We haven't seen any
no, we've seen nothing
the
else.
last 3 months of working in. So.
Yeah.
So this could have been done at the same time as the house was built, which would give us some really good evidence on the house dating.
I would have thought this was around 1600. It could be plus or minus 10 years or so.
Well, that helps.
That's enormous. Yeah.
Oh, hello. Hi, Robin. How are you done up at the...
So the paintings clearly don't link the building to the monks because they're too late. But down in the library, things have been going rather better.
A document in 1334, when the Abbot of Burton granted 5 days indulgence from the bloodletting from midday on Saturday till Vespers on the 4th day after, in that place surrounded by a dyke in the park of Shobnall, with increased allowance of bread and beer beyond the usual. So there we have the Abbot of Burton referring to Sinai Park. There's nowhere else in Shobnall Manor surrounded by a ditch. Used for bloodletting for the monks. And that, I found, links in with the name. None of the documents we've seen call it Sinai.
No, we've noticed that, haven't we?
That map you found, the 1760 map, still called it Sinai Park. And I think that's what it is, looking in one...
Robin has found that a seine meant the process of bloodletting, or the place where it was done. And after a seine, the monks were given a few days' vacation.
Seines were apparently much looked forward to by monks. And they could go and have a break from the usual rounds of services in the Abbey. So, Sinai Park,
so
holiday home, on the hill, in a moat.
Inspired by his discovery of a medieval door, Mike has taken Jane and architectural historian Bob Meeson up into the roof of the manor house.
A few times. Fantastic. You've been up here, Michael?
Yeah, quite a few times, yeah.
Wow.
What
do you make of this then,
So you haven't seen it before?
Not all this far, no.
It really is rather special. This is the real McCoy. It's a genuine, really classy medieval roof.
The floor doesn't actually correspond with the actual arch. The arch seems to, like, come from nowhere, so obviously this floor was done.
You're absolutely
afterwards.
right. The arch that you can see seems to go into nowhere because the floor has been inserted. This is an 18th century lime ash inserted floor, ceiling over the attic in what used to be a great open roof space.
Right.
So if this is really, really classy, obviously it wouldn't be a barn for storage, it would be someone's house.
I don't think so. No, you're looking at very special carpentry here, if only from the point of view of the quality of the mouldings and just the graceful shape of the arch and the sheer dynamism of the style of the roof. You're talking about something which forms a wing to something of manorial status or possibly connected with a religious gentleman of high order.
But it couldn't have been the Lord of the Manor, because the chap from the Stafford Central Archives told us it was only called the Manor when William Paget got it.
That's right.
After the dissolution of the monasteries. Therefore, it must have been part of the old Abbey complex.
Right, yeah. Which is obviously, could have been somebody like an abbot that lived here.
It must have been.
So where are the teams at the end of day one? Well, Mike and Jane now have a pretty shrewd idea that the manor house wasn't only part of the Abbey, but was probably the lodging of the abbot himself. The Abbey Inn team have got to find out whether the infirmary really is listed in the Paget survey, but under another name. And the Sinai Park team are wondering why those strange medieval monks wanted to have their blood let at Sinai Park House. But what about how their buildings fitted in with the actual Abbey? They've hardly started on that.
No, I mean, I think straight away tomorrow they've got to get on and start comparing other Abbey plans with this one. That's the only way they're going to make any progress.
And if they do that, do you reckon we could get an Abbey plan by tomorrow night?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure we.
I hope you're right. Join us after the break.
Where it sits.
The Manor House team are broadening the scope of their research. They know the house probably belonged to the abbot, but now they want to establish where it stood in relation to the other Abbey buildings.
So they all worked with a similar plan, did they? All these abbeys?
Yeah, they were based on the same sort of idea. Right. Yeah. This is one in Yorkshire.
Which is what? St Fountain.
And as you can see, they've all basically got the same sort of layout.
Yeah, there's all cloister.
Everything's positioned in similar.
Chapter house,
yeah.
the nave, the church.
Yeah, and that is
the great court. The Abbot's Palace.
Because
the
Abbot's Palace. I wonder if that
was
was
a little bit further away from the main part of the
one
Abbey.
here as well, Abbot's Palace and
Again,
King's.
Again, quite a reasonable distance. Virtually identical. The layout is with the King's Hall, Abbot's Palace.
That's right.
Then into the cloister, the refectories next to it as well. The great court. It's a carbon
they've
copy.
all got, yeah.
Probably because it is a carbon copy. They're both Bury St Edmunds.
Carol, we've been down the history room and we've seen some documents about bloodletting, and it seems well, to me, a strange sort of ritual. Can you explain what it actually means and how it was done, even?
Yeah, well, bloodletting is a major part of medieval therapy, and it's used for two purposes. One is if you're sick, but the other is to stop you falling ill. And we have to remember that in this period, once you did become sick, you don't have the operating theatres, the anaesthesia, the antisepsis, antibiotics, all the things that you, Robin, probably
rely on.
So how would they actually take the blood, then, would you say?
Well, let me show you, because we've got a nice chart here, and this will interest Tony, because what we've got here is a phlebotomy chart. Now, this is in case you're sick. There's specific parts of the body where you'll let blood for certain ailments or certain humoral blockages. And Tony, you'll be interested in this one, because this is specifically for melancholic man, right?
Oh, where have I bled?
Right in the back, the knife in the back.
Ooh, nasty. Nothing new there.
Now, if you're healthy, then it's usually let from the basilic vein, which is just on your elbow. And it's something which a trained infirmer, monk, or a barber can do quite easily.
What do they do it with?
They do it with a lancet. And when you're trained to be a phlebotomist or a bloodletter, You're told it's very important to keep your instruments clean, to get the rust off them.
Oh, crikey.
To keep your hands clean. You're not supposed to have shaky hands, and that's very revealing, isn't it?
What would happen to the blood? Was that ever used for anything, or was it just a waste product?
Well, that's a contentious question, because a lot of bloodletters in towns and cities in medieval England and in Europe got into trouble for dumping the blood in the street. And in the regulations for York, for example, it specifically tells the barbers they're not to take the basins of blood and let them out in the gutters, but to take them, you know, somewhere safe.
You're talking of basins of blood. How much were they taking off?
Well, I was thinking when you said every... How many weeks did you say they go?
6 or 7.
Every 6 or 7 weeks.
This is very carefully regulated. It's no hit-and-miss business. It's very sophisticated.
It's taken very seriously then.
Very seriously. The amount of blood you were let, when you were let.
How about someone at this time of year who might have, out of the blue, say, some black bile?
Oh, I don't know, Tony. I'd have to weigh up your urine sample first before I made my mind up.
A history of the abbots that was written in the early...
Back in the history room, the Abbey Inn team are consulting county historian Nigel Tringham about that possibility that the monks could have converted the infirmary into something else.
There's one particular entry here which I think could be of relevance. It's an entry for William of Bromley, and he was abbot in about 1316 to the 1320s. And in this history, little potted histories of the individual abbots, it actually tells you that this man, William of Bromley, he made the great hall, Magnam Aulam, next to, Yuxta, the water of the fleet, Aquam de la Fleet. We have the word the Great Hall, but you don't know what the fleet is. That's not very obvious.
No.
But I've got an idea that might be able to help there. If we look at the 1760 map of Burton, that shows what I think is the fleet.
Excellent. Excellent.
So should we go and do that then?
Indeed.
That 1760 map.
Yep.
Okay. So if we go over here. Now, the word fleet, which we've just looked at, means a channel. Now, this is a map of 1760 for Burton, and it shows the main course of the river running along here. It's a bit of a distance away from the town. But the Abbey Inn actually stands next to a channel of water, which runs along here. So I think that is what the fleet means.
Indeed.
I imagine quite early on in the Middle Ages, the abbots would have wanted to increase the water supply to the abbey for various purposes. So they must have dug a channel from the main course of the river to increase the water supply. So that's why you've got this fleet running along just next to the Abbey Inn now.
So could the infirmary be the building listed as the Great Hall in both the Abbott's History and the Paget Survey? Armed with the Paget measurements, Glyn and Phil go back to the Abbey Inn to measure up. If the measurements match the figures in the 16th century survey, they'll know the pub was the Great Hall.
So do you think this sort of fits into the orientation of where the Great Hall was?
Well, hang on, the river's that way, isn't it, at that side?
Yes.
So, yeah, this must be the chapel.
Right.
But, I mean, it's what Carol was saying, isn't it? There would be a complex of buildings, so I don't see why there shouldn't be something off that way. Right. But, I mean, what you've got to sort out is whether the measurements fit anywhere at all.
Absolutely.
Should we do that now?
Indeed, yeah.
Go on, then, you give me the end of the tape, or give Glyn the end of the tape. This is the right sort of, perhaps the right sort of... Stunning, and you've known about this. So what have you got there, Phil?
We've got roughly 7 metres, probably a little bit over.
That's about... So that's 22, 23 feet. I mean, that's not big enough for the hall size you've got, but that doesn't matter, because we're clearly in the chapel here, aren't we?
Right, right.
No doubt about that.
Right.
I think the orientation's right, it's east-west, it's facing the river that way.
And would have been supported by the vaulted structure below?
Probably, yeah.
I don't know much about it.
The Sinai team have moved on to consider how the house was used after the dissolution, when the Pagets acquired it, along with all the other Abbey buildings.
But you didn't have time to look at them.
No, unfortunately.
These are letters from the times of the Paget, and there's an extraordinary document here, which is a catalogue of the bucks that were shot in the park in 1584. So here we have it being used as a hunting lodge, really.
Oh, right.
Bucks shot by the Earl of Essex. E-X-S-S-I-C-K-S. Wonderful spelling. Now, 1584, Queen Elizabeth's time. Not quite sure when Robert Devereux had his head cut off, but here's one Earl of Essex shooting buck in Sinai Park. So if people of that calibre, court circles, top people, were coming to shoot here, the shooting must have been good, and there must have been somewhere fairly substantial for them to stay.
Well, there must have been, yeah. They must have large grounds to be able to withstand this hunting, anyway.
It seems to have gone from a monastic sick bay and holiday home through a farm stage to a hunting lodge.
Oh, right.
Right, so you've got that corner there, Glyn.
OK.
And you want it as low down on floor level as you can, if you can get a measurement down there. And then, Phil, if you go in that far corner there...
Sure. About 10 metres.
So that is far too short.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right, well, there's one other idea then.
Right.
And that is that it might be that the two arches in the end represent the end of this hall. Right. You know, the two outside?
That we looked at in the beginning.
Yeah. So I think you should measure the width of that.
Yes.
And then we'll have another think. Yeah, but I suspect that we haven't got the hall I'm mentioning in these two rooms, and it might be out the other way.
Right.
So let's go and do that now.
OK, great.
And then we can see where that leads us, what the conclusion is from that.
Yeah, brilliant.
And medieval roof's fun.
This one was, especially.
If you just run a tape across the end, really across these two arches, and see what that comes out at.
All the way to the end, yeah?
Yeah, well, just in the arch or by it there. What have we got then, Phil?
To the end of here?
Yeah.
About 10 metres.
See, what I think is that that measurement might be related to something coming this way.
Sure.
Right, bring it out to about 22 metres, which is just 69 feet or so. Right. In 1920, 22, thereabouts, look.
Right.
And what is interesting, look, is that you've got an earthwork corner turning here, look. You see this slope comes along and then turns and goes back down. That could be the end corner of that. So I reckon that this is probably the hall.
Right.
That we're looking at here. Did you get that, Glenn?
Yeah, you're saying that the hall...
This is about the wall here, and we've got a kink in the grass and a bump there. So this could actually be the hall coming this way.
Right. That ties in with what Bob was saying.
So it looks like there was a change of use. Once there was an infirmary here on the banks of the Fleet, and later there was a great hall that may well have incorporated the chapel. And so Glyn's pub was once an important Abbey building.
I've come across this rather scrappy account, and what this is
Did you find anything in there?
Ah, well, it's not indexed very clearly, so it just happens that I've came through it. And this is a 1572-3 account of the Paget household. Oh. And it happens, this has been puzzling me a little bit, so you might be able to help here, because it shows here, 1572-3, that Thomas Paget was spending money on building a new timber-framed house at Burton. I'd assumed it was somewhere in the monastic complex, where the manor house or the Abbey Inn. Yep. But it might be Sinai Park.
It's all part of his Burton estate, isn't it?
And why would Lord Paget be wanting to rebuild part of the Sinai Park in the 1570s?
Well, we found evidence of a hunting lodge, so unless he wanted to make the wings slightly bigger to accommodate people to come and use the property to hunt.
So the church, which we know, the measurement...
With the information from the Abbey plans and a bit of help from historian Ian Atherton, the Manor House team can now begin to lay out a model of the Abbey.
There was a doorway in the south wall, roughly here, which was almost certainly the doorway into the cloister, so we can then add the cloister, which would have gone there on the south side.
That's numbered 2. And then we know from the brass markings in the road yesterday the position of the gatehouse. So we've got the first 3 definite pieces.
I've poked around most of the areas now, but I haven't actually been...
Now that they've worked out the function of the Abbey in itself, Glyn and Phil have got an hour or so left to find out how the infirmary would have fitted into the layout of the Abbey as a whole. Mick suggests that they look round the pub garden, which stands between the Abbey Inn and the church.
About that, what's this then? Look at this. You've got a... It looks to me as we might actually have the chapter house, because we've got one side here, look, with carving down that part, and another bit there carving down there.
Yeah, what's a chapter house?
Well, that's the room that they met in each day for a sort of like administrative matters, and sorted that sort of thing out. But the point is, it's in the East Range, just south of the church.
Right.
So if that's in situ, which it looks as if it is, then it means that we've got the East Range going down here. And that wing of the infirmary over there, which means we might have the infirmary cloister between the two of them, in fact. Did you know about this, Clint? It's in your garden.
I've never been this far down the garden, to be honest.
Excellent. Come on, let's get off to the history room.
Which was done a little while ago. We know that this room...
A car, and it's Dendro Bob.
Back at Sinai Park House, the team have been eagerly expecting Robert Howard to return with the results of the tree ring dating.
Have you got some results for us? Exciting news?
Well, I think so, yes.
There had been some tree ring dating done in the past. In particular, the restored north wing with its wall paintings was dated to the early 1500s. But what about the building opposite, the south wing?
That's got a felling date of late 1572 to early 1573.
That's spot on. Is that?
Yes, that's spot on.
Well,
Very good.
That's ringing bells with us. Right. Yeah, we've got a date.
It rang bells because of the document the team had seen in the library, which indicated that the Pagets were erecting a new timber-framed building in late 1572, early 1573, quite possibly to extend the accommodation in the hunting lodge. That left the whole range in the middle, the lower part of which was dated to around 1600, with a roof of up to 50 years later. The 1600 date was interesting because it matched the date for the wall paintings, so clearly there was extensive rebuilding and refurbishment at Sinai around then.
What's this about bloodletting?
Ezekiel cried. Mick?
Yeah?
I need your expert opinion. I'm in a bit of a quandary.
Day 2 nearly over. The Abbey Inn team think they might just complete the Abbey plan, but where exactly do the buildings go?
The chapter house.
Is that in the right place? I just think you need to pull that back a bit. If, say, that wall that goes along the churchyard is more or less where that is.
Sure.
So you've got Glyn's garden in here.
Yeah.
We've then got... We'll have to borrow a few others, I think. But if we've got, say, the chapel block...
Right.
Which is, you know, where we went up and you got the windows in the end.
So that's going to be...
And then that's the timber roof of the bit that's left. Right. That's 14...
Right, starting to start visualise.
OK, so let's pinch something else while we're at it. Then what we were saying was the arches in the end of that...
Right.
...come out into another wing, which is the actual hospital wing like that.
Yes.
OK?
Right.
And then this, I think, is the size for the... infirmary cloister.
Right.
And we've no idea where that was.
No, but we always knew that that was connected to that.
Yeah, so my guess is that that's actually somewhere in like that.
Sure.
And if we then say, where does the manor house fit into this, I think we can do that as well, because we know there must be a south range with the refectory, the eating place in, so we'll borrow this building here, stick that in there.
Yeah.
We know there must be the west range, because there always is.
Right.
The cellarers range, the quartermaster, if you like. And somewhere off the end there is usually where the abbot's house is, and that would put it somewhere in that sort of area there.
Right.
You can see that that fits, because as we come away from the pub, we swing round the manor house on the way out to the marketplace. So I'm sure that's, you know, more or less in the right position. And what we see then is, you know, if we'd have flown over this in 1500, I'm sure it would have looked something like that.
We set our three teams the task of trying to work out as much as they could about the history of their buildings. How have they done?
Oh, I think they've done fantastic. I mean, the Abbey Inn here, I think we've really confirmed that this was the infirmary, with all the evidence they've got from that. Whereas at the manor house, I think we can be certain now that that was the abbot's house at the end of the West Range.
And up at Sinai, we've got a whole story of what life was like during medieval times.
Yeah.
It was a great couple of days' work,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
yeah.
It was all incredibly hard work, though, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And there was a time round about 5 o'clock on day 1 where the black bile was actually leaking out of every pore. But we got there in the end. Well done. Cheers.
Cheers.
You can follow the quests of this week's Time Team History Hunters in a special Channel 4 website, and the History Hunters return at the same time next Saturday. Back to today, and just a reminder that John's